This podcast is supported by patrons. You can find a full list of them in the description of this episode. Hello, listeners of Good Morning BSS World podcast. This is Wiktor, Doktor from Poland, from Warsaw, and today I am connecting with Mexico. Yes, we are going to Mexico, where there is my special guest, Sean Goforth, and we will discuss with him the recent research of Ryan Strategic Advisory. But first, let me welcome Sean. How are you, Sean?
Doing well, Wiktor. It's so good to connect with you here.
So tell us where you are in this Mexico, because Mexico is quite a big country.
It is. It's a bit like Poland in that respect. Lots of cities and a terrific culture and history. I am in Mexico City, and I've been here for a few years now. I'm generally based here. Ryan Strategic Advisory, the firm I work with as Director of Research, is of course run by Peter Ryan, who's generally speaking based in Montreal, Canada, though he moves about.
And we had just a little chat before we started that now Peter is somewhere in Europe going through Germany. I don't know where he goes, but anyway, he's traveling quite often.
Yes, where in the world is Peter?
Yeah, that's a good question. So maybe once this episode will be live, we will ask him to comment when he was when we were recording it.
Fantastic. He'll appreciate that, and we may also get a reference to some 80s music along with that.
Definitely, absolutely, yes, because he's a big fan of the music of the 80s. But anyway, he is somewhere in Europe, and we are now going to talk about the report which is also touching Europe. The title of your research is Europe and the Nearshore between Geopolitics, Recession and Resilience, and it was issued in July 2023. So it's quite fresh, I would say, because we are recording this podcast on the very early of August 2023. How long did it take you to actually work on this research?
First of all, let me say thanks, Wiktor, for having me on. I look forward to this conversation. We do an annual report that focuses on Europe and the nearshore after we publish the main findings of the Ryan Strategic Advisory Front Office CX Omnibus Survey. That's a big part, one of our marquee research products that we conduct, generally speaking, in Q1 of each year. This year it had a little over 700 respondents who are CX decision makers spread throughout the world. In this case, just over 400 of them were based in one of the European demand markets, so either the UK, Spain, France, Italy, Germany. And after the publication of this report, which generally occurs in April, perhaps May, we then look at some of the trends within this report, because the omnibus survey itself ultimately is probably about 110 pages. Covering all these geographies and numerous technology and business process trends. On the back of that, we sit down and begin to look at some of the nearshore dynamics. And this is what led to ultimately the publication of Europe and the Nearshore report. This was taking place in May and June of 2023. So in addition to the omnibus survey findings, which this is the European Nearshore report is based on, we reach out to several influential decision makers in the region, people with a unique vantage, to discuss some of the trends that they're seeing, and in the hopes of trying to add some additional color to the hard data that we provide. So after about 2 months, we have this report. It of course goes through a design process, and so it was published about 3 weeks ago.
So we have a big report, which is like the basis of that, and then the second step, which is these results of the research. This is 10 pages. So not too big one, but it has a lot of very interesting insights inside.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully readers can go to ryanadvisory.com, and you click on the front page, you click on the top right, it says latest research. You can download the report there for free. And I hope readers will agree, it's packed with insights, but it should be digestible. As you said, it's 10 pages.
Yeah, it is very digestible, and for sure we can already say that in the description of this podcast there will be links added actually to go to the Ryan Strategic Advisory webpage just to find out where the results of this research are. But let's now go a little bit inside of this document. What are the main outputs after this research?
So, at a very high level, what we start to do is, before we even get to the nearshore destinations and their characteristics and performance, we actually look at what's going on within the demand markets themselves. Because let's be honest, when it comes to customer services, companies historically would prefer to do it themselves, do it in house, and if that's not possible, do it domestically. So there's a degree of preference for this, and so we analyze within Europe itself, where is this feasible, where is it less feasible, and this has some very interesting contrasts that are apparent between certain markets, such as France and Spain, where you're seeing the persistence of a work from home model that seems deeply embedded in the contact center space and customer experience management. And this is coupled with the fact that in these two markets, there are secondary cities that offer approximately 20 to 30% labor savings over the cost that would prevail in the capital market. So if we're thinking of France perhaps as the best example, compared to Paris, you can go to a city like Lille, you can go to a city like Pau, you can go to Lyon, and there you can save 30% and still provide the service domestically, which is tremendously appealing. So as a result of this, we're seeing a persistence of work from home and hybrid work in Spain and in France. Now, we're not seeing that degree of persistence within another market like Germany. Germany just has a completely different wage structure. There's been a whole series of laws over the past decade plus that have aimed to bring about basically regional equality in salaries and wages. In addition to this, in the past 18 months, even before the pandemic was officially over, the government began to pass legislation to ensure that wages kept in line with inflation, which has had the net effect of driving up domestic delivery cost, making it really among the highest, most expensive countries in the world for domestic CX management. So the point here is, one of the trends that we look at in the report is we do note the tendency of work from home and hybrid delivery and its feasibility, and it's not an equal story across Western Europe. From there, when enterprises are looking to offshore, the biggest trend that has persisted is not just evident this year, but over the course of the Omnibus Survey's history, going back over the past 7 years, and frankly, going back probably over since the origination of the offshore model, is there's a strong bias toward markets where, frankly, there's a colonial legacy. So England is going to be offshoring to India historically, to places like Jamaica more recently. Meanwhile, French offshore preferences are going to skew toward parts of Africa where native French is spoken, and likewise, Spanish offshoring is going to tend toward Latin America. So that's the broadest trend that you can see in order to understand the major offshore dynamic. This is important, I believe, because despite that tendency, there have been, offshore markets that have emerged with tremendous value propositions, and they have gained a tremendous number of clients and have really burgeoned into their own BPO ecosystem, where you have government support, where you have multiple players that are participating in the market, where you have large numbers of fresh graduates that can speak English or are multilingual, and you have tech skills. So, having said that, I think that situates us to speak a bit more about Poland and perhaps Egypt.
Yeah, I can see that actually from one of the graphs which are included in the report. The title of it is Offshore Location Favorability. And on the top two locations is India, which is probably made by UK business, and then Poland.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, and Poland is fascinating because you get high quality English and you get tech skills, two things that are fundamentally in demand. And as the market has matured in recent years, what we've seen is the development of numerous secondary cities, as I'm sure you know, Wiktor, that has really deepened the value proposition, because historically one of the big concerns that many C-suites deal with when they're considering the option of offshoring is the talent spread out? Is it congested in one place? And how quickly can the market become saturated? Because lots of smaller markets that rely on just delivery from one city can easily attract one player and they're successful, but then they attract two or three more, and soon they're completely saturated. Wages start to rise. You get poaching and all sorts of other problems. So one of the big features of Poland, as it's matured as a market, is when you go out from Warsaw, you see the development of all sorts of secondary cities, be it the Tri-City area, be it Lublin, you just Poznan, you see all these other cities. I think by last count, there's probably something like 15 or 18 different cities that that not just have validated that they can do offshoring and do it well, but that have the investment from different players. So they're operationalizing it.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. In Poland, we've got at least 14 cities which are already ready and with existing BPO CX players. And this is quite popular that the companies of this type, they are present both in the capital and then having the other branches in the other locations. But Poland is not the only country in Europe which actually is having an attention of the CX companies. What are the other countries in Europe which are like emerging or are surprising for you?
I mean, it's not at this point a complete surprise. We've seen this trending over the past few years, but certainly Croatia's gained a degree of support and favorability, specifically when it comes to Italian enterprises that are looking to offshore their work, and it continues despite fairly large investments in recent years. It continues to validate itself. The the sort of biggest surprise, if you will, in the last this year, in the last 2 or 3 years, has been, I would say, Georgia, and even more recently, North Macedonia. What we're seeing with these markets is in Georgia, you've seen two large players that helped anchor the market since 2020. And now you're starting to see smaller and local players emerge in the market, not just in the capital of Tbilisi, but there's two smaller cities that have outsourcing enterprises, and it has a unique multilingual combination, which is not just a high prevalence of English speakers. There's a big divide sort of between generations in Georgia. The older folks tend to speak Georgian and Russian, but if you're in your 30s, you've gone to school and grown up in more of a cultural environment that favors English. So they tend to speak English as well as Georgian, and a large percentage of the population actually speaks German. So the demand for German language services has really grown there. The other thing that I would point out that is a surprise and warrants mention is the fact that the overall view of the Balkans as a region has been impressively resilient despite these border conflicts between Serbia and Kosovo. And so, unfortunately, due to this, the favorability of these markets, which had been growing at a fairly impressive rate 3-4 years ago, the favorability of both markets has declined significantly this year. But the silver lining of this, I don't know that it's much consolation to those in Kosovo, is that it doesn't reflect an overall souring of the region in terms of favorability. What it really reflects is the enterprises that favor the Balkans, because fundamentally this is a multilingual region. We think the word Balkans conjures up, this notion of fragmented and perhaps dysfunctional, but in reality, it's a multilingual region. And so if you can establish, an enterprise there and operate effectively, you can then draw on a tremendous language force. And there is the demand in the broader region of countries for these languages, not to mention in Western Europe. And so what we're seeing is, while favorability has declined for Serbia and for Kosovo, it's actually increasing to impressive levels when it comes to North Macedonia. So when you look at Italy, for instance, when the Italian CX decision makers responded to our question about favorability, what markets do they favor for offshore delivery? North Macedonia is in the top 5, which is impressive globally, considering that there are 50 plus options where offshore delivery services are viable. So that would be the biggest surprise, would be North Macedonia. Georgia continues to gain traction.
I think that this is one of the biggest benefits of the Central and Eastern and South Europe, this multilinguality. Yeah, that here you have a combination of the Western languages, but also the Eastern ones. And this is quite easy for people who live within those countries to learn the Western languages. And that's why it creates this attractiveness of this part of the world, and especially the part of the Europe. You mentioned the preferables of Italians. Actually, in your report, on one of the pages, there is a table with Europe's top offshore destinations, mentioning those top 5 for the UK's French, German, Italian, and Spanish respondents to your survey. Maybe let's go through that and let's mention those top five for each of those countries?
Yeah. So when it comes to the UK, it's going to be the large offshore markets that we all know. So it's going to be India, South Africa. Um, South Africa is actually remarkable for its resilience in the sense that in recent years it's dealing with growing problems in terms of protest, what they call load shedding, which is favorable parlance for blackouts that are getting worse and worse every year, and domestic political problems. Despite this, you still see tremendous service delivery from South Africa and the continued popularity. There has been some skewing of this favorability away from Johannesburg toward the Western Cape. But even so, you have a wonderful ecosystem in South Africa that has proved enduring despite the headwinds. So you have India, you have South Africa for the UK, and then you have Poland. The big surprise with Poland, if I may, is beyond the English, beyond the tech skills, beyond the secondary cities. Let's be honest with each other. Everybody 15, 18 months ago was really bracing for the worst in terms of not just the fallout from the direct fallout of the immigration crisis as Ukrainians fled into Poland, but a souring in investment appetite for countries like Poland that find themselves situated in the neighborhood and vicinity of Europe's largest land war since World War II. And this is now something that I think people, certainly in the West, can overlook, but it deserves being noted. Poland has proved itself tremendously resilient over this period of time. Early forecast, not by Ryan Strategic Advisory, but elsewhere in the analyst industry, was that overall Europe would see a westward shift as investment, minimized footprints or closed down in countries like Poland and moved to Greece or moved to Portugal. And there's no evidence of that. This has not been the case. In fact, beyond Poland's persistently high favorability, thanks to its core skills, it has proven itself to be a tremendously resilient place to do business. And in fact, as I'm sure you're aware, there's also been a study that shows there was a 16% increase in new ITO BPO projects in 2022 compared to a European-wide increase that was marginally positive, but I think was 1% increase for the region. If I'm not mistaken, that amounts to something like over 70 new IT and BPO investment projects throughout Poland. So this is something that warrants mention. It's not just that Poland was favorable and is still favorable. I think it's worth stressing this resilience has been impressive. And that creates its own form of favorability because here we are, and when we ask about favorability, what goes into the favorability calculation, one of the major things is business continuity. The fact that Poland's proven that it can continue to keep the lights on, the IT remains robust, even residential IT. There hasn't been any glitches, so to speak, as it relates to business operations, has been impressive. So I'm giving you a very wordy answer when you ask me about top five, but I want to add some extra color to this. In addition to this, we see the other classic places for England like Philippines and Malta, France, as I mentioned, France, Spain, and France and Spain are going to be largely oriented around the offshore markets where there's a colonial legacy that allows for native level Spanish or French, as the case may be. So when it comes When it comes to France, you see Senegal, you see the Ivory Coast. When it comes to Spain, you see El Salvador, you see Mexico, you see Panama, Colombia, Honduras. Um, Egypt's, Germany's interesting because you don't have that same degree of colonial fallback in terms of native German-speaking markets. So you see Poland. Number one is actually Egypt. You see the Czech Republic and Hungary and Slovakia. All Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovakia, Poland. There are a large number of native, of fluent German speakers. And when you consider Italy, you're seeing countries that are just across, the Dalmatian coast of Croatia, Slovenia, and Romania. Interestingly enough, we're talking about how the Balkans are at this juncture of Europe, and this exposes the inhabitants to different languages, and there's a degree of flexibility in speaking these languages. Of course, Romania is an interesting example. Not only do they have not only are they speaking Romanian, they're speaking Italian, and there's a huge number of Spanish speakers in Romania as well. So that's not in perfect order, but that's the top. I've given you the top five of the UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain.
Thank you very much for that. But I need to go deeper into one country. This Egypt, yeah, for Germans, like all the others countries in this top five are from Europe. And that's understandable. Yeah, those are neighbors. There are German speakers who are all around present over there. But this Egypt, come on. Why is it so? What's so strong in Egypt that Germans do look to this country, and it is mentioned, it is lined like number one destination for German business?
Yeah, bravo to the Egyptians. Egypt, Egypt's a fairly unique market, and I'm glad you asked about it because it deserves some attention. Egypt emerged in this space as a nearshore player on the basis of its multilingual capacity, initially English and French, and then over the course of the past decade or so, increasingly German. I think a lot of people will find this perhaps surprising, but there's been tremendous interest from the Goethe Institute in peppering the country with language institutes and training modules, not just in Cairo but in Alexandria and increasingly elsewhere in the country. Actually, the government has announced earlier this year, end of 2022, that by 2024, German's going to be a second language in public schools in Egypt. And we're seeing this on the back of an announcement last year that there would be something like 100 extra additional training institutes in the country. There's a large number of subsidies from the government for German language training, which has allowed for this German-speaking population to grow up in Egypt. But it remains attractive because it is a one-stop shop for multilingual services. You have English, you have German, you have French, and increasingly, as you talk about offshore and sourcing strategy, firms are looking at a degree of Western European delivery. There, of course, there are certainly regionally specialized firms, but there are many global firms they're looking at in North America. So they want to have that English, that scalable English delivery. And it must be said, when it comes to Egypt, they're also positioning for a fast-growing consumer market in the Middle East. So the fact that you have native Arabic is something that is really appealing when it comes to Egypt's value proposition.
And there is one other benefit of this country. It is the same time zone as Europe.
Well, there you go. At the same time zone alignment, you get that classical nearshore advantage. The easy time zone alignment. It's very accessible. So now that business travel is returning to normal, people can access Egypt very easily from Western Europe.
I have such a feeling that Egypt and some of the mid Africa's countries are going to become bigger and bigger competitors to the classical, I would say, near shoring and offshoring destinations, like, for example, Central Eastern Europe or the Asian destinations.
Yeah, no, I mean they're certainly worth watching. Um, Egypt, what you could see, and what is evident is Egypt is the anchor of familiarity for that entire region. So as opposed to going directly to Tunisia, you'll see you're likely to see investment first in Egypt, and then it can spread out throughout North Africa.
Definitely, absolutely. So we will be looking closer to this, what is going to happen in the African countries in the next months and probably years, because this is not so fast process, so it takes some time. But anyway, Sean, I think we will put the full stop in here. So as I mentioned, we will add some links to the description of this episode to make people easier to find the results of your research and the survey. Anything for the end of our talk?
No, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you, Wiktor, and I look forward to catching up with you again before long.
I need to come and visit you in this Mexico City. I've never been there.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Sean, for today.
Bye bye.